believe that it's very important is for us to take a look at the respective environments that we operate in.
So today we're going to learn about personality, the differences of personalities, and about relationships.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our first session in 2014 of the HUD OCIO Learning Session. I'm Dr. Melanie Cohen. I want to welcome those who are here and those who are watching on the internet. So today we have a very interesting topic, something a little bit different than we normally do. We're going to be talking about the Homeless Analytics Application, delivering actionable information to prevent and end homelessness. And we have two people who, as speakers, who are renowned in the field. We have Dr. Dennis Culhane. Dr. Culhane is the Dana and Andrew Stone Professor of Social Policy at the School of Social Policy and Practice at the University of Pennsylvania. And we also have Dr. Tom Byrne. Dr. Byrne is a research assistant professor at the School of Social Policy and Practice, also at the University of Pennsylvania. And this work was part of his doctoral work, part of his dissertation. So with that, I'm going to go right to Tom Byrne is going to be doing most of the presentation. He's going to be walking through somewhat of a tutorial for this, which I think should be very interesting for us to learn about. And we can be a little bit more interactive because we have the availability to ask questions during the tutorial. So with that, I'd say take it away, Tom.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you very much, Melanie. Appreciate the introduction, and I'm excited to share the analytics application with all of you today. And as Melanie said, as I'm going through the demonstration and the slides here, if there are questions, feel free to ask those, just sort of clarification questions. If there's maybe larger questions, those might be best held off to the end. But if there's sort of quick clarifying questions that you think I can answer really quickly, I'm happy to do that as I go through these slides. So I guess, Melanie, do you want me to just let you guys know when to advance the slides here?
Just say next slide, Tom.
Okay, so next slide. So just a really quick introduction and overview to the Homelessness Analytics Application. This was one of HUD's open government initiatives, is the way that this application came into being, and it was created through a collaboration between HUD as well as the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs and the National Center on Homelessness Among Veterans was sort of the lead in developing this application. Next slide. So as we'll see, once we get into the actual demonstration of the application itself, what the application is an online application that has a map-based interface, and it's really intended to provide communities, organizations, and other users with easy access to actionable information on a number of things, including trends in homelessness across communities and over time, services and resources that may be available to prevent and end homelessness, and community-level indicators, things like rent level, unemployment rates, and so forth that may be related to homelessness. Next slide. So as we'll see once we get into the actual demo of the application itself, there's a number of key features that users can access in order to explore the data that's available in the application. So there's a mapping feature, there's the ability to create charts and graphs, and also a tool that allows users to look at how community-level factors might be expected to impact the rates of homelessness in a community. Next slide. So the data sources that feed into the application, there's quite a few of them that we use. There's just a few examples there of the data sources that we made use of to build this application. So I won't go through them individually, but just to let folks know that there's quite a range of data sources, very rich data sources that are available in the application itself. And these are grouped into different categories. Next slide. As you can kind of see there, there's a number of different categories of indicators that are available in the application itself. You can see a few examples there, but at present there's more than 200 indicators at different levels of geography that users can access through the application, with more to come in the future. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we're planning to make this something that we update on a fairly regular basis in the coming months and years. So we have some planned updates in the relatively near future, within the next 1 to 3 months, where we're going to be adding new data and additional indicators beyond what's presently available in the application. We're also going to be adding some features that will allow users to look at really small areas of geography, to look at the prior address distribution of veterans who become homeless, which we think may be helpful in helping communities target prevention programs and prevention resources to those areas where many veterans who become homeless may be coming from. And we're also going to be adding some program-level performance metrics for VA-specific homeless programs. In the longer term, we're hoping to add similar community and program-level performance metrics for the HUD-funded homeless assistance programs, and also incorporate, in addition to the point-in-time estimates of homelessness that we'll see are available in the application, ideally some annual estimates of homelessness from the annual homeless assessment report to Congress. And we're going to be, in the future, just modifying the application so that the user experience is more streamlined and it's easier to access the information that folks are interested in. Next slide. So I won't go through each of these individually, but this is just to kind of give folks a sense of the range of potential uses of the application. And certainly the uses of the application are not limited to the types of the things that you see here, but this is just a quick overview of a few larger scale objectives that the application could be applied to. The next slide. So really, the meat of this presentation is going to be a demonstration of the application itself in action. And we structured this demonstration around 4 questions that we thought users might commonly have and might be able to use the application to answer. And so the idea is really to show a step-by-step demo of how a user could answer these questions, just as a way to introduce the various features and capabilities of the application. So without further ado, I guess we'll jump right into the tutorial portion of this presentation. So what you see here is the landing page for the application. This is what you'll see when you first get to the site. This is just the landing page and the initial, when you go to the URL right off the bat, this is what you'll see. And the quickest way into the application is just to click on the Get Started button, next slide, in the upper right-hand corner there. Next slide. So this is what you'll see when you first enter into the application. You'll see that there's a quick little tutorial that's available for users that provides a quick description of the various features of the application itself. Next slide. And if you click on the little Dismiss button there in the left-hand side of the screen, you'll be able to jump right into the application. And so what you see here, this is the default map for the application itself is a map of all continuums of care in the United States. So as I'm sure many of you are familiar with, continuums of care are the geographic units at which HUD allocates homeless assistance funds. And it's also the smallest unit of geography at which point-in-time estimates of the homeless population are available. So that's the default view when you first arrive at the application itself. Next slide. So jumping to this first question, just a very basic question of how many persons in my community are experiencing homelessness. This is something that the application is readily able to do in a very quick manner. So next slide. So for the purposes of this demonstration, let's assume that the community that we're interested in is Philadelphia. And so next slide, if you were to simply type Philadelphia in the geography search bar that's located in the upper left-hand corner there, you can see the red box around it, hopefully. If you were to type Philadelphia in, immediately what would pop up is this community summary bubble for the Philadelphia continuum of care. And you can see in that community summary bubble are just a handful of quick indicators on homelessness on the scope of homelessness in Philadelphia. Next slide, and you'll see that we have a really quick answer to our question just from that community summary bubble of the total number of persons experiencing homelessness on a given night in Philadelphia. Now, the other thing that we can do from this community summary bubble, next slide, is to click on this View Report button that's in the bottom of the community summary bubble. And when you do that, what pops up, next slide, is just a quick 2-page snapshot report of homelessness in Philadelphia. And you can kind of see what this report looks like. It provides you with information on trends in various homeless subpopulations over time in Philadelphia, including family households, veterans, and individuals who are chronically homeless. Next slide. And you'll also get a quick snapshot of resources available to address homelessness in Philadelphia and some community-level indicators, things like household income and rent levels that may be associated with homelessness. Next slide. Now, of course, we may be interested in other measures of homelessness in our community of interest simply besides the total number of persons experiencing homelessness on a given night. So if we're interested in some other measures, what we can do is click on the Show Indicator panel, next slide, that's highlighted there in the upper right-hand corner. Next slide, and that will show the active indicator panel. And if we were to click on the indicator selector, next slide, which is highlighted there in the red box, next slide, what we'll get is an indicator menu. And you can see in the indicator menu there's a range of different categories of indicators that are available in the application. So if we're interested in other measures of homelessness, what we can do is click on the homelessness counts and variable in the indicator menu, next slide, which is highlighted there in red. And that will provide us with a drop-down menu of a range of different indicators of homelessness in our community. So one thing that we might be interested in, besides just the total number of persons experiencing homelessness, is the rate of homelessness in our community, which looks at, which provides a relative measure of the scope of homelessness in a community of interest that accounts for the underlying size of the community itself. Next slide. So we can select that measure of the rate of homelessness per 10,000 persons in poverty, and that will get, next slide, added to our active indicator menu. And we can close the active indicator menu, next slide, by clicking on those double arrows there in the right in the right part of the screen. And what we can do is zoom in really close to Philadelphia by clicking, next slide, on the zoom arrows in the left-hand corner of the screen. And now what shows up in our community summary bubble is not only the measure of the total of the raw count of homeless persons on a given night in Philadelphia, but the measure of the rate of homelessness per 10,000 persons in poverty as well. Now, the application allows us not only to look at, next slide, at continuums of care, but also at other levels of geography as well. Next slide. So if we were interested in looking not just at Philadelphia, but at the state of Pennsylvania as a whole, what we could do is click on the geography selector, which is highlighted in the red box there. Next slide. And we'll get a drop-down of different geographies that are available in the application. Next slide. So if we were to select states instead of a map of continuums of care, next slide, what we would get is a map of the entire United States using states as the basic level of geography. And now we get the same, next slide, we get the same set of indicators that we were just looking at for Philadelphia for the entire state of Pennsylvania. Next slide. One other thing that we can do is also change the color scheme of the map. So if we're not a fan of the current color scheme of the map, we can click on the color scheme selector, which is the little gear on the legend that's highlighted in red there. Next slide. And we'll get a number of different options that we can choose from to change the color scheme of the map that's currently being displayed. Next slide. So if we're more of a fan of orange, we can easily change the map to an orange color scheme. Next slide. So that's kind of a quick intro into how to answer a very basic question about the number of persons experiencing homelessness in a community. But if we're interested in this second question, which is a little bit more complex of a question, that being, is the problem of homelessness more serious in my community than in other communities, and how has this changed over time? This is also a question that we can easily use the application to answer. Next slide. So let's say that for the sake of this question, what we're interested in is really chronic homelessness in our community and how that compares to other communities. So if we wanted to look specifically at chronic homelessness, next slide, what we could do is open the active indicator panel, next slide, and select from the homeless counts and variables drop-down menu. We could select the total number of persons experiencing chronic homelessness, next slide, which is highlighted in that red box there. And we can add that to our active indicator menu. Next slide. And then we can close the active indicator menu by clicking on those double arrows. Next slide. And one way that we can quickly, now what's being mapped is the total number of chronically homeless persons on a given night in 2012. Now, if we're interested in comparing our community of interest, Philadelphia, to other communities to see whether Philadelphia has a more serious problem, a more serious chronic homelessness problem than other communities, one way that we can compare communities is to do it visually using the map. Next slide. So if we were to click on the arrows in the upper left-hand corner there, the zoom arrows, we could zoom into Philadelphia. Next slide. And again, we'd get this community summary bubble, which would tell us that on a given night in 2012, there were 590 persons experiencing chronic homelessness in Philadelphia. Now, we can just tell visually that on this map, Philadelphia is darker in color than some of the surrounding communities, which would indicate that it has a larger number of individuals experiencing chronic homelessness on a given night in 2012. Next slide. And we can confirm this by clicking on a nearby community, in this case, Trenton, New Jersey, and we can see that on a given night in 2012, there were only 62 persons experiencing chronic homelessness in Trenton, which is a much smaller number than the 590 that we saw for Philadelphia. Now, of course, Philadelphia and Trenton are cities that are very different in terms of their population sizes. So a more accurate way to compare communities might be to compare the rates of chronic homelessness between these two communities, which would adjust for differences in the population size and make it so that we're dealing with an apples-to-apples comparison in terms of understanding the scope of the chronic homelessness problem in these two communities. Next slide. So if we were to open the active indicator panel, next slide, and navigate to the homelessness counts and variables drop-down menu, what we could do is add the total rate of chronic homelessness per 10,000 persons in poverty as one of our active indicators. Next slide. And now what you see for Philadelphia is that the total rate of chronic homelessness per 10,000 persons in poverty is 16. So there's, for every 10,000 residents in Philadelphia, there are 16 persons who were chronically homeless on a given night in 2012. And now the map looks a little bit different. Philadelphia is no longer a lot darker than its surrounding communities. And we can kind of confirm that this is the case by clicking on Trenton. And now, when we're looking at this relative measure of chronic homelessness, the rate per 10,000 persons in poverty, we actually see that the rate of chronic homelessness is higher in Trenton than it is in Philadelphia. So this gives us another way to look at the scope of chronic homelessness and to compare the problem between communities. And I should note that, as far as I know, the only place that you can get these measures, these rates per 10,000 persons and per 10,000 persons in poverty at the COC level is in this application, because in developing the application, we calculated these rates at the COC level, and we think it's an important way to make apples-to-apples comparisons between communities. Now, we can very easily compare Philadelphia to nearby communities visually using the map feature, but if we were interested in comparing Philadelphia to communities that might not be located nearby, it's a little bit more difficult to do that with the map. But what we can use, the different feature that's available in the application, the charting tool. Next slide. So if we click on charts in the tool menu bar, next slide, by default, what you see is the total rate of chronic homelessness per 10,000 persons in poverty for the 4 largest cities in the United States, New York City, LA, Chicago, and Houston. But we can easily add Philadelphia to this chart to make side-by-side comparisons with these larger cities. Next slide. And the way that we do that is just by typing in Philadelphia in the geography search bar and clicking next slide and clicking on the Philadelphia COC and adding it to the plot. Now, next slide, what we have is a side-by-side comparison between Philadelphia and these other large cities in the United States. And this charting feature doesn't really show up on the PowerPoint here, but this is a dynamic chart such that when you mouse over a specific point on the chart, you get a little pop-up bubble that tells you the value for that specific point. You can see an example of that there for Philadelphia. Now we can modify this chart to include any mix of communities that we want and are interested in comparing. And I believe that we can compare up to 10 communities at a time on this chart. And the way that we do that is just by adding and removing communities that are of interest. Next slide. So you can see if we wanted to add Boston to this chart, we could do so just by adding Boston and getting rid of one of the larger COCs, Los Angeles County. So now the chart looks a little bit different and has some communities that may be of specific interest to us. Next slide. Now, if we were interested in comparing Philadelphia to every other community in the United States, that is fairly easy to do with the application as well. If you click on the Tables tool in the tool menu bar, which is highlighted in red there, what you get is a table with information for every continuum of care in the United States, and it includes all of our active indicators that we've selected. And we can add and remove indicators to customize this chart to have all of the information to customize the table to have all of the information that we want. If we click on the double arrow there, next slide, which is highlighted in red, again, we'll see our active indicator panel. Next slide. And we can add indicators, as many indicators as we want to this table. Next slide. And then what we can do is download this table that we've created and customized to our needs by clicking on the Download CSV button in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. It should be highlighted in red there. And this will allow us to save a CSV file onto our computer, and this is a file that can be opened in Excel or any other statistical software package that folks might use, and will allow us to do our own analysis on these data sets. Next slide. Now, moving to this third question, which is about the resources that are available in a community to address homelessness, the application has some really important information that will allow users to answer this question as well. Next slide. So if we were to open our active indicator panel, next slide, and select housing inventory variables from the indicator menu, next slide, what we'll get is a drop-down menu of all the different indicators related to resources intended to prevent and end homelessness that are available in the application. And let's say that for the sake of this demonstration, what we're really interested in is the availability of permanent housing units intended specifically for individuals experiencing chronic homelessness. And you can see there highlighted in red that information is available in the application, and by clicking on it, we can add it to our active indicator menu. Next slide. Now, one thing that we can do is look at changes in, we can use the chart feature, next slide, to compare the number of permanent housing units for individuals experiencing chronic homelessness in Philadelphia relative to some other large cities in the United States. And another thing that we can do using the charting tools that are available in the application is to plot changes in the availability of permanent housing for chronically homeless persons over time against the total number of persons experiencing chronic homelessness in Philadelphia. And to do that, what we would do, next slide, is click on the Trend Variables button in the chart tool menu there, which should be highlighted in red. And this will give us a chart that shows how the number of persons experiencing chronic homelessness and the total number of permanent housing units for specifically for chronically homeless individuals has trended over time in Philadelphia. So it just gives us a sense of how these two variables travel together over time, and might be a useful thing for helping to identify gaps in resources that are needed to address chronic homelessness. Next slide. And you can change the two indicators that are being plotted on the two y-axes there using the indicator drop-down menu there. Next slide. And that's just an example of how that works. Next slide. The other thing that we can do is download this information in table format. So if we were to click on Tables in the tool menu bar, next slide, what we would get, again, is a table with information on the total number of permanent housing units for chronically homeless individuals in every community throughout the United States. And if we were specifically interested in resources intended for chronically homeless veterans, we could look at the total number of HUD VASH vouchers in each community. And HUD VASH is a permanent housing program that's jointly funded by the HUD and VA and is intended to serve chronically homeless veterans. So if we were interested specifically in veterans and resources for veterans, we could add the number of HUD VASH vouchers available in each community to the table by selecting it from the indicator drop-down menu. Next slide. And again, we could download this table as a CSV file for our own analysis in Excel or another software package. And you can see highlighted in the lower right-hand corner there, again, we could do that just by clicking on that Download CSV button once we've included all of the indicators that are of interest to us. Now, if we're interested, next slide, specifically in resources for veterans, besides the number of HUD VASH vouchers, one thing that is possible to do in the application is to plot the locations of all VA facilities located throughout the country. So you can see in the lower right-hand corner of the screen there, the red box is around a button that says Show VA Locations. So if we were to click that button, what we would get is locations of all VA medical centers, outpatient clinics, and other facilities located throughout the country. And what you see there is just points that represent clusters of multiple VA facilities. So if we were to zoom in on the map, next slide. Next slide. If we were to zoom in, we would see the locations of individual VA facilities on the map itself and some information about them. Now, in the relatively near future, we're going to be adding for VA medical centers some information about some program-level performance metrics for the VA-specific homeless programs that are operated at each medical center, just to provide information about the number of veterans served by these programs and their outcomes as well. Next slide. So moving on to this final question of the demonstration. This has to do with looking at how factors like unemployment and rent level might have an impact on the scope of homelessness in a community. So the scope of homelessness in a community is often portrayed in news media, and also there's research to support this as well, that the scope of homelessness in a community is closely related to larger scale economic and housing market factors like unemployment rates and rent levels and rental vacancy rates and so forth. So the application includes a number of community level indicators that may be linked to the extent of homelessness in a community. And so we can explore those indicators and how they might be related to homelessness with the application as well. So if we were to open the active indicator panel, next slide, and we were to navigate to the economic and housing condition variables that are available in the application, one thing that might be of specific interest to us is the relationship between rent levels and homelessness in communities. So see highlighted in the red box there that one of the things that's available in the application to explore is the fair market rent levels for apartments of different sizes in communities. And the fair market rent, as I'm sure many of you know, is published annually by HUD, and it's the rent levels at the 40th percentile of the distribution of all rents for apartments of various sizes. So if we're interested in the fair market rent for a 2-bedroom apartment, we can click on that and add it to our active indicator menu there. Next slide. And one thing that we can do is use the chart feature, and it has some interesting, the chart tool has some interesting features that allow us to look closely at the relationship between rent levels and homelessness. So if we were to click on charts in the tool menu bar, should be highlighted in red there. Next slide. What we would get is a chart of how the fair market rent for a 2-bedroom apartment has changed over time in Philadelphia and a number of other different communities. But if we were interested specifically in the relationship between rent levels and homelessness, one way we could do this, we could explore this relationship would be to use the scatter plot tool, which we can click on in the chart tool menu bar. And now what we have is a scatter plot of all continuums of care in the United States. And what you see on the x-axis there is the fair market rent level for a 2-bedroom apartment. And what we see on the y-axis is the total rate of homelessness per 10,000 persons in poverty. And each dot on the map represents a specific community. So you can see there, and again, this is a dynamic chart. So if you mouse over a specific dot, you'll get both the fair market rent level and the total rate of homelessness for that community. You can see that what's displayed there are those two values for the Pasadena continuum of care. What's interesting about this, plot is that you can sort of see a positive relationship between rent levels and the total rate of homelessness per 10,000 persons in poverty, such that communities with higher fair market rent levels tend to have higher total rates of homelessness. There's a little bit of a positive trend that's visible in that scatter plot. Next slide. And of course, we can plot any two indicators that we want. We can create a scatter plot of any two indicators that are available in the application and that we might be interested in exploring the relationship between, just by using the indicator drop-down menu there. Next slide. Next slide. Now, of course, the scatter plot provides sort of a visual way to look at the relationship between fair market rent and homelessness, but the application also has a forecasting tool that allows us to look at how changes in rent levels might be expected to impact the rate of homelessness in a community. And this forecasting tool is based on a set of statistical models that we estimated in developing the application that examined the relationship between a number of different variables, including rent levels and rates of homelessness. So to access this forecasting tool, all we need to do is click on Forecasting in the chart menu bar, which should be highlighted in red there. Next slide. And you can see the default indicator that shows up on the chart there is the total rate, next slide, of the total rate of veteran homelessness per 10,000 veterans. And we can modify this so we can look at the relationship between a number of community level factors and different homeless subpopulations by selecting a different outcome population from the drop-down menu. Next slide. So for example, if we were interested in the relationship between rent levels and the total rate of homelessness among individuals, we could select that from the drop-down menu. But for the time being, next slide, let's assume that we're interested in the relationship between rent levels and the rate of homelessness among veterans. And you can see that by default, we get our community of interest, Philadelphia, along with 2 other COCs, but we can customize the COCs that are being displayed on that chart using the geography search bar, which should be highlighted in red there. So for example, if we wanted to add Baltimore, next slide, we could easily do that just by adding it, by typing it into the geography search bar. Next slide. So the way that this forecasting tool works is by allowing users to manipulate different indicators and seeing how changes in these indicators might be expected or might be related to the rate of homelessness in a community. So those slider bars that should be highlighted in red there are users are able to manipulate those and change multiple indicators to see how they might be expected to be related to the rate of homelessness in a community. So for this example, we're interested in the relationship between rent levels and rates of homelessness. So next slide. If we were interested in how an increase in the rent level for a 2-bedroom apartment might be expected to impact the rate of homelessness, we could slide that indicator to the right, and there what we see is how a $150 increase in the median rent level for a 2-bedroom apartment might be expected to impact the rate of homelessness. So what you can see in the little next slide, bubble there for Philadelphia is the current value and the predicted rate of homelessness, assuming that the rent level were to increase by $150. Next slide. And we've run a series of different statistical models looking at different types of indicators. So the one that you see on the screen now has to do with economic and housing market condition variables. Next slide. But we also estimated separate models that look at different types of predictors. So for example, if we were interested in how changes in the rate of illicit drug use might be expected to impact rates of homelessness in the community, we're able to do that as well with the forecasting tool. Next slide. That more or less concludes the demonstration portion of the presentation here today. But I did want to note really quickly 2 other things that I think users might be interested in knowing as they get into the application itself. The first has to do with saving work and saving sessions in the application. Next slide. So you can use the sharing options menu, which should be highlighted in the red box in the upper right-hand corner of that screen, to save or share your work. So you could, if you were to create a map, you could share it on Facebook, Twitter, or Google+ if you wanted to. The other thing that you could do is create a permalink, which stands for permanent link. And if you were to click on that, what you would get is a URL that you could use to return to your current session. It would save everything that you've been working on, and you could click on that link at a later date if you had to stop what you were doing and wanted to come back to exactly what your session looked like when you left it. You could do that just by clicking on the permalink that is created there. The other thing that I wanted to mention really quickly is that if you're interested in, next slide, if you're interested in more details on where the data for the application comes from, what exact indicators are available, and sort of the nuts and bolts behind the application itself and the models that we estimated, you can download the methodology on the landing page of the application. Next slide. Right now, it's a little bit hidden at the very bottom of that of the landing page. You can see the red box highlighting where you could download a PDF document that provides all the details on how we developed the application. In the future, we're going to make that more prominent because I think it is something that a lot of people will be interested in. But right now, that's where it's currently available. Next slide. So in closing, what I wanted to provide folks with is just a list of exercises, more or less, that you could try and complete just as a way to get to know the application a little bit better and become more familiar with the data that are available in the application and its various features. What we've found is that the best way for users to become familiar with the application is to try to get some hands-on experience in using the application to answer some really specific questions. So just in closing, I'll leave you with, I guess, a little bit of a homework assignment here for folks that are interested. If you were to use the application to try and answer each of these questions in turn, I think you would become much more familiar with the application and get a really good sense of its capabilities and the features that are available in the application itself. So I'll conclude with that. Next slide. And my contact information is on this last slide here. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, this is something that we are planning to update on a fairly regular basis. And so if folks are using the application and have suggestions for changes or additional indicators that might be of use in their day-to-day work to have included in the application, I'd certainly be very open and much appreciative of feedback in that area about suggested changes, additions, and improvements to the application itself. Because our goal with this application is really to make it as useful as possible to folks in their day-to-day work, whatever that might be. So my contact information is there. If you are using the application and have some suggestions, please feel free to send me an email. And with that, I think I will conclude and open it to questions that folks might have about the application itself.
Okay. Well, great. Well, thank you very much, Tom. I think that I think the application is terrific. I know I've tried it a couple times to see what I can do with it, and I think that you've actually, by giving this tutorial, have just sort of scratched the surface in what's available. And so what I'm going to do is open it up to some questions from the audience to see if there's audience questions first. Anybody who knows me or watches this every month knows that I am full of questions, so there's always something that I can ask, but I'm going to see if there's audience questions. So, okay, terrific. We have an audience question.
Do you know of any communities that are using the application now?
Yeah, and so I forgot to mention at the beginning that this has actually been live since June of this year. I've talked to a few communities who've used it. There's some folks in Virginia with the State Housing Agency in Virginia. I'm blanking on what the exact name of the department has that I believe is going to use it at a meeting of all of the continuums of care in Virginia. I should follow up and see how that went with them, but I know that's one example of a place that was using it.
Okay, and as a follow-up, have you seen the application drive any type of policy reform?
So at this point, one of the things that I'm hoping to improve as we move forward with this is kind of feedback from the user community of folks who might be using it. So right now, I haven't heard much in terms of actual policy decisions that have had their genesis with the application itself. But I'm hoping in the future that as we make enhancements to the user experience of the application, that we'll have some more dialogue with folks who are using it than we actually do right now.
Okay. Do we have any other audience questions? Okay. Well, I have a question. So here's my thinking, and particularly after I use the application. It seems like in the world today it's really a network world. So we have to have that collaboration between the public, private, nonprofit sectors to actually impact and get some value out to society. So I'm kind of wondering, Tom, if you know, and you may not actually hear the feedback. I mean, and that's very possible about the application. I mean, how is this being, other than doing this and a lot of probably publicity from the VA and from HUD, how are we actually advertising this out so that everybody knows about it, because it's such a valuable tool? Have we, are you familiar with how that's going, even in the academic community? How is that working? Because I would imagine this is going to be very useful in the academic community and think tanks in getting a lot of very, very bright people thinking about how to solve the homelessness problem.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that's something that we could do a better job of actually spreading the word about this application and making clear its range of potential uses. And I should say that I don't think it's just a tool for folks who might be in the academic world or at think tanks. One of the things that I think this could be really useful for is for organizations or agencies who are writing grants to kind of demonstrate the need in their community for new resources. There's lots of information here that an agency that wanted to kind of make the case for why they would be good candidates for a grant, for example, could use this application to pull some quick statistics that would be good indicators of need and maybe gaps in services in their community. So I do think that, as I mentioned, as we move forward with this, one of the things that we're planning on doing is doing more outreach and publicity of the application, but also making really clear how the application will be of potential value to a broad range of different stakeholders.
Okay, we have time for one more question, and we happen to have one more question from the audience.
Hello, this was a fantastic presentation. I just more of a comment, I guess, than a question. I work in community planning and development, and we have an EGIS application on the HUD IT server that PD&R manages called CPD Maps that has a lot of extra data, and I think that there could be some synergy possibly between the application that you all have created and the EGIS application called CPD Maps, because there are things like poverty rates and all that, but it kind of goes beyond that. So it could really kind of give sort of a comprehensive, this tool and that tool could really kind of be synergized together to allow community development planners, I'm thinking community development departments, to allow them to really kind of have an amplified piece when they're doing their consolidated plans. So I was just wondering if you've had any dialogue with Meg Barclay or Rob Renner at HUD.
No, I actually haven't. If you have contact information for them that you wouldn't mind.
I'll get all that.
Or if someone could share that with me. I think that's a great idea.
That's a great idea. And I'll get that. So it looks as if we're right up to the time limit. So I think this was a terrific presentation, and I think we all learned a lot. And just the idea of sharing information is incredibly valuable. So in closing, thank you very much, Tom, for being available for us to do the demo. And I will invite all of you in person, on the internet, to join us for our February session, where we will have Dr. Christopher Durney talking about communication and the idea of how do you it's not just sending out a message. It's the idea of what's your message, what media are you using, and how do you craft that message, and how do you do all that correctly to make sure your meaning gets across. So please join us in February. And with that, I'll say have a wonderful day, and thank you again for attending.